Welcome to Divisionalysis. I'm Fog. Today we continue our journey of discovery into the assault rifle weapon damage talents, and today it is all about crit chance and crit damage. Let's go. So we're on to the second round of weapon talents, being critical hit damage or critical hit chance talents. We've got our generic build on with Gunner as the specialization, and it's providing us 5% rate of fire on kill, 10% weapon handling, and 50% reload speed. That won't have any effect on today because we're only concerned with crit chance and crit damage. So neither will our weapon damage have any effect today, but our 59% crit chance and our 153% crit damage is going to be the focus. Currently, we're producing 90.27% average crit damage output on the build. And we're firing for roughly 65% of the time and 35% reloading, again, not going to be affected by today. So, our control build currently putting out 90.27% average crit damage, and that gives us a 456% return over our base. Today, it's this box. What's going to go in this box and the improvement that that's going to produce. Those talents are Killer, Strained, and Vindictive. So Killer granting us 40% critical hit damage, Strained 10% critical hit damage for every 0.5 seconds we're firing, and then Vindictive, which has the tricky characteristic of providing us both crit chance and crit damage. So when there's only crit hit damage involved, it's actually very easy. We're just going to be adding to our output of crit hit damage and improving our 90.27%. Whereas with Vindictive, and where there is an alteration to crit chance, it requires you to actually make alterations to your build in order to get maximum benefit from it. And what that means, you are going to end up coming down in crit chance in order to take maximum advantage of the 15% available. But that does allow you to rejig your build and increase your base level of crit hit damage. So your output without that talent active is going to be reduced. So you're starting from a negative balance as far as damage output is concerned, relying very heavily on that talent being active. For Killer, it's going to increase our crit hit damage up to 193%, meaning that when we are active, 113.87% crit damage output. For Strained, has the ability to ramp up to 50% added crit hit damage, which means that it is capable of 119.77% crit damage output. And for Vindictive, we ramp up our crit chance and we ramp up our crit damage, meaning that you can average somewhere around about 108 to 110% crit damage output. But remembering that Vindictive is a group talent. So we're going to start off with Killer. Killing an enemy with a critical hit grants 40% critical hit damage for 10 seconds. So from our base, which is our 90.27% output, Killer now ramps that up to 113.87% crit damage output, making our output 513.29% when active, meaning that when it is procced, Killer will grant you 12.4% damage to your build. But as with all talents, it is an if and then. If it is procced, then you will get 12.4%. So we need to work out the if portion. If you saw my headshots video, I explained the principle that critical hits are more likely to kill an enemy than what a non-critical hit is. And that's very important for the proc rate of Killer because it is on kill and it requires you to kill with a critical hit. But it works very much in the advantage of Killer in this case. I'm not going to explain how this is calculated because it's just going to bake people's brains. It baked my brain for a very long time working out exactly how to calculate this. What has become abundantly clear to me is that nobody cares about how the watch is made, you just want to know the time. So at 50% crit chance and 100% crit damage, the proc rate for Killer would in fact be 66%. So rather than 50%, although that's its occurrence rate, 66% of the time, the enemy will die to a critical hit. Now, in the case of our current build, before we've actually procced the talent, we're running at 59% crit chance and 153% crit damage, which means that a critical hit is in fact 81% likely to kill that enemy. Now, once we've actually procced Killer, it has the advantage of re-procking, which is a very important characteristic of this talent. And then when you're re-procking, you're obviously now still at 59%, but you now have all of the crit hit damage benefit that goes along with that procced talent. And at 193% crit hit damage, you are now procking 83.6% of the time, or re-procking 83.6% of the time. Now, what does that actually look like? So on the first enemy, we're at 81% likely to actually proc our talent, which means that 19% of the time we're going to go to the next one without the talent procced. But because of likelihood and probabilities, you are actually 96.4% likely to have procced the talent after killing 2 enemies. After 3, 99.3% likely. So you may as well consider that after 3 enemies, if you haven't procced that talent, you are incredibly unlucky. And here's some footage of me in the firing range. I think I'm firing for about 10 minutes or something like that. During this time, only twice does it take me until the 3rd enemy to proc Killer. Now, you might be forgiven for thinking that that means that on average I'm going to have this talent up 96% of the time, which is incredible as far as an uptime is concerned. But that's not how the talent works, because it is an on-kill talent, which means that you will never ever have it available for the first target that you engage. And what that means is that on average, across 6 enemies, which is our most likely number faced at any given time, the uptime for Killer will be 79.5% of the time. Now, there's a couple more conditions here, because there is also a time factor that's involved. But to see where that 79.5% comes from, essentially, this is the combination that you're most likely to encounter. 81% of the time, you're going to be without the talent for the first target, and then the next 5, it's going to be up 100% of the time, meaning that it's providing, across those 6 enemies, 83.33% of its full value, and that occurs 81% of the time, so its overall percentage added to the value is 67.5%. 15.4% of the time, you are going to be without the talent for the first 2 targets, and then you're going to have it for the rest of the time, resulting in 10.27% added to the total. And in roughly 2.9% of the time, you're going to be without it for the first 3 targets and have it for the rest of the time. But then if you are incredibly unlucky, less than 1% of the time, you'll be without it for 4 of the targets, and it's almost not even worth talking about. But that's where your 79% or 79.5% value from Killer comes from. Now, that important factor in regards to time, and it is a very important one, because if there is a break in your ability to continue engaging targets, you are reset. Now, these following examples aren't 100% correct, but they definitely serve the purpose of demonstrating exactly what I'm talking about. The next target that you engage, if that 10 seconds has elapsed, will 100% of the time have 0 benefit to you. So if there was a break in between those 6 targets, then you're only going to receive 66% value from it, because you've only got it up for 4 out of the 6 targets, and because that happens 81% of the time, you're looking at a 54% value from it. Then again, if we are unlucky, if there is a break, the most important part of this, although it's not 100% accurate, what it means is that the value that you get from Killer significantly drops. We're talking about from almost 80% down to 60% value for Killer. Then, if there's 2 breaks, and you're only able to engage 2 targets at a time, then that reduces again down to around about 47%. Again, not 100% accurate, but for demonstration purposes, I think it tells a very clear story as far as the trend is concerned. So from our 12.4%, if we were to get 100% value from it, that obviously now reduces based on its proc rate and our ability to engage the enemies quickly. So 79.5% value, where we're able to engage very fast, and we're actually going to receive 9.86% added damage to our build from Killer, which is actually very, very good. If there's a single break, then we're looking at about 7.5%. And if we're slow at engaging, or if they're hiding in cover, or that talent expires twice during a wave, then we're going to be down towards 5 to 6% of Killer's value. Then we also have the qualitative characteristics as well. So as far as ease goes, well, I'm literally killing things anyway, but it is an on-kill mechanic, which does have some impact, and it actually has quite a high proc rate. But that proc rate and its value is 100% tied to your ability to acquire new targets. And depending on your playstyle, that actually can significantly reduce your capability to get full advantage from Killer. But I think given that the game is 4 years old, the majority of people should be able to get a very high percentage of Killer's available damage, which is quite high. There is going to be more value from Killer when you have a lower crit damage. So as with all of these talents, when you're adding into the same bucket as something that you already have on your build, there is going to be diminished returns. So the less that you have of that on your build, the more return you will get from this talent. And that is still the case with Killer, in spite of the fact that reduced crit damage will in fact reduce the proc rate of the talent as well. But by having less crit damage on your build, you're going to have less damage. And going back to the first point, it's not just your ability to acquire the target, it is also your ability to kill the target as well, which is necessary to proc the talent. As with any on-kill mechanic, you are going to lose significant value in group play because the breaks between when you are actually achieving the kill is going to be longer. So when I move on to Strained now, 10% critical damage for every 0.5 seconds you are firing, and stacking up to 5 times. So at full value, we're now outputting 119.77% average crit damage, and that gives us a 527.45% over our base, and that represents a 15.5% addition to our overall damage output. Very powerful. But it's always if then then. If I'm firing for what amounts to 2.5 seconds, after that time, that's the only time that I'm actually going to be at full power. So our proc rate, it's building over time. So it's not until we reach that 2.5 second mark where we actually achieve our full 15.5% added to our build. And clearly it is tied to how long you are firing at that full value as to how much you gain from this talent. That after 1 second, you're going to get 1.4%. After 2 seconds, 4.4%. After 3 seconds, 7.5%. After 4 seconds, 9.45%. After 5 seconds, once we reach it, up to that point, we have averaged 10.64% added to the build. But there are actually very few weapons that actually can reach the 5 second mark. Generally, the fast fire weapons have a higher RPM, meaning that they dump their mag quicker than other weapons, meaning that their total amount of firing time is less. And what that means is that a 900 RPM weapon will generally achieve around about an average of 5.75% from the talent. A 750 RPM weapon will generally gain about 7%, and a 600 RPM weapon, the only ones that are capable of reaching up to that 10%, are going to achieve around about 8.6%. And that's because of the division between when we are actually doing multi-target damage or enduring damage versus when we are doing single target damage, because that's all that's available to us. So we will undershoot our magazine a considerable amount of time, and even when we are capable of reaching 5 seconds worth of firing time, it's highly unlikely that we will actually do it. So it's very easy, just point and shoot. It's just firing time dependent. Clearly, as demonstrated, there is more value on slower firing weapons. They're firing for longer, so therefore they are going to take more advantage from it. There is less value for higher damage builds, and the reason for this is because you are killing enemies faster when you are landing rounds, meaning that you are firing for less time. As with the other crit damage talents, there is more value on a lower crit damage build. There's more value when there's more enemies on the pitch, obviously, because if there's more enemies on the pitch, you are going to be doing multi-target DPS much more often, but any break in your firing will lose the buff completely. So here I am in the firing range, so any break that's longer than 0.5 of a second, you will be starting back at scratch every single time, and that is going to greatly impact your ability to achieve those percentages that I said before. Even though you are under firing that magazine, it's already been reduced, your ability to access even that full percentage is going to be significantly reduced, greatly undercutting the advantage of strain. But what I will say is that on a build that has the ability to endure damage, that is lower in damage and lower in crit damage than the average, aka tank builds, you could potentially be accessing 10 to 15% of the damage available from strained consistently. So much higher value on blue builds than it is on red builds. Vindictive. First team talent that we're going to be looking at. But killing an enemy with a status effect applied grants you and all of your allies within 15 meters 15% crit chance and 15% crit damage for 20 seconds. As I already stated, there is a reduction in your start state in order for you to take maximum advantage of Vindictive. At any time that you've got a modification to crit chance on your build, there are some differences between 3-slot weapons and 4-slot weapons. It's something I probably should have brought up in the flatline video as well, but in that case it literally only affected one weapon and one weapon only. That was the Honey Badger, which is the only 3-slot weapon that can access the under-barrel laser. But in this case, Vindictive is accessible by all the weapons that aren't exotics, and that means that there's a greater selection of 3-slot weapons that you may be using. Now normally, the 3-slot weapons having one less crit chance mod are compensated by having a higher base weapon damage. But when it comes to a crit chance talent, when you remove any crit chance from the build, either a mod on the weapon or a mod from the build, that removal represents a greater percentage of the damage for that build because the crit chance is spread across fewer mods and gear mods, weapon mods and gear mods. There's going to be variations in your crit chance configurations on your build, but in order to take maximum advantage of Vindictive, the sweet spot is obviously 45%, and that comes with a negative start state as far as your damage output is concerned. And that negative start state in this case can set you back as much as 9% overall damage to your build before Vindictive is procced. But once it is procced, you'll return to 60% crit chance and you'll increase your crit damage, and that will increase the total output of your build to 9+%. Now that doesn't seem like very much when we compare it to the max of both Strained and Killer, but what you have to remember is this could potentially now be multiplied by 4 players. As far as the team is concerned, the whole team's damage output is only going to increase as a percentage by 9.3%, but as a total for that single player proccing that represents a 37% increase on damage. And Vindictive is not an easy talent to master. There is the activation of a status effect first of all, then the talent is activated on kill. Those people that benefit from it have to be within a certain radius, and then after that it only lasts for 20 seconds. But it does have reproc capabilities. But as far as an individual's ability to add damage to team output, that individual can represent 37% added damage. In group play, the team runs the risk of being at a negative start state in order to get maximum benefit from the talent itself. These, as well as its layered difficulty to proc, so status activation, you've even got the considerations in regards to who gets the kill, all of these build considerations considerably add to the difficulty around making Vindictive work for a team. You can risk it for the biscuit, relying on your ability and your team's ability to build correctly for the talent and activate it as well, but there are also ways in which you can take advantage of it without having the risk associated. But you will minimize the reward. So that is that you won't build for the talent's activation. The talent's activation will, however, be a benefit. And we can do that by leaving our statistics at their control state, so 59, 153. And that means that we start at a 0 start state, on par with our control build, and then the benefit reduces from 9 down to 5.5%. But that is still multiplied across 4 players, being up to 22% added benefit to the team for an individual's contribution. But again, you have to remember that it is an on-kill activation. Generally, the person with the status effects isn't going to be the one that's going to be doing the killing, so there is a lot of group dynamics that add to the difficulties and the layers of those difficulties. So 3 crit hit damage talents. Let's have a look at where we stand with all of the talents that we've looked at so far. So we have Thunderstrike, which is offering us between 0 and 30% damage to our build. It has no self-proccing capabilities. There are limited skills that can in fact proc that shock effect. But in a team environment where some people are running St. Elmo's, there is the potential for a very large addition to damage output. For Eyeless, Ignited and Sadist, self-proc rate being at 20% gives us a 4% average, but it is really 20% to 1 in every 5. So the most effective tactic is to have a skill or a gear talent that is going to proc that for you. And as was pointed out by Jacob Faber 4920 in one of the comments recently, status damage for Ignited and Statist actually adds to the damage output of both of those talents, and it's something that we'll consider when we move into working out synergizing between skills and weapon damage output. That status damage portion is something that can't be ignored. When we're talking flatline, if we're looking at the link laser pointer, removing gunner and applying technician, we're looking at a 4.27% damage output from flatline at 100% uptime. But we do have the capability of accessing up to 15% damage output. We've got technician, where there's limited weapons that are available to put the linked laser on, but with skill assignment, there is the potential that we can have 100% uptime and 100% value from flatline. Again, that combination of skill and weapon synergy is something that we're going to have to look at as far as damage output is concerned. Ranger, super easy. Point and shoot, distance dependent. For heroic, we're probably looking at about a 7% addition to our damage output. For legendary, potentially 9 to 13% average damage output. Strained Killer and Vindictive, new talents. Strained 6 to 8%. Depending on whether or not you can maintain that fire, it's probably slightly less than that. But it does have the capability of returning potentially 8 to 11% for your tank build. So keep that in mind. For Killer, 7 to 9.5%. Probably, at this point in time, the most consistent producer of damage for an experienced player without the assignment of a skill to proc it. But it is tied to your ability to move quickly. And it also has reduced value when it comes to group play, as does any on-kill mechanic. Vindictive, it is a risk it for the biscuit talent, not really designed for individual play, but it still has potential there. It's just those layers of difficulty with proccing it, which obviously become much easier with group play. Has the potential to add 9% damage, like Killer, except you're starting at a deficit this time, but you're never going to have it active for the first target, and with a reduced number of targets in solo play, it's going to drastically impact your ability to get benefit from it. But in group play, where you've got a shared load as far as activation is concerned, and there are a larger number of enemies with a 20-second time delay on re-procking it, if you can find synergy amongst your group, it can provide a massive benefit to the team. And if you don't want to risk it for the biscuit by taking that deficit up front, there is still potential for it to be a completely viable talent as far as adding damage to the team is concerned, just by incidental proccing. We'll definitely explore when it comes to group synergy later on down the track. But that's where we stand right now. There is not a lot of difference when it comes to the added damage provided by these talents. And to be honest, it's probably going to come down to build synergy as to which of these talents is going to provide you the most damage output. Something that's going to take a little more to investigate. But right now, you've got the information in regards to these talents, but there are more talents to explore. Next episode, we're going to look into the added weapon damage talents. If you like this one, like it. If you want to see the added weapon damage talents explored, hit the subscribe button, maybe even the notifications to know when I release it first. And then I will see you in that episode. Thanks very much for watching. Fog out.